There's a kind of silence that follows certain conversations, not because anything was left unsaid, but because nothing real was said at all. You bump into someone you used to know well. The words are there. All right? Yeah, you? Yeah, good. You? A few half sentences about work, family, how busy things are, how hard things have been. You smile, maybe laugh a bit, nod, gesture, go through it all like a familiar dance. And then it's over. You walk away, and somewhere a dullness sets in. You weren't hurt, you weren't ignored, but you weren't met either. And it happens again, and again, and again, until, eventually, a man starts to believe that's all friendship ever was meant to be. A quiet shoulder tap, a joke, a catch-up that scratches the surface and never dares to dive, but underneath something aches. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a soft, persistent emptiness, like hunger that's gone on long enough to stop feeling like hunger at all. Most men wouldn't name it. They'd just call it being tired, busy, overwhelmed, distracted. But it's none of those things. It's the absence of something far more vital. It's the absence of feeling known. And if you're reading this or listening to this and thinking, yeah, I felt that, then let me tell you something simple and quiet and true. You're not broken. You're not emotionally cold. You're not incapable of depth or connection or real closeness. You're just living inside a structure that was never built to hold those things. Most male friendships were designed to bond through doing, not through being. Side by side, not face to face. Shoulder to shoulder on the football pitch, the Xbox, the bar stool. Always next to, rarely with. And in that space, curiosity can feel like intrusion. A follow-up question feels like pressure. A deeper answer feels like risk. So we keep it light. We keep it easy. We keep it safe. And then we wonder why it feels like something is missing. But it doesn't have to stay like this. Real connection isn't beyond you. It's not reserved for women or therapists or people who cry more easily than you do. You just need a new blueprint. One that isn't about being less of a man, but more of a human. That's what this conversation is. It's not a lecture, it's a lantern. You don't need to be someone else. You just need to let yourself want more, and trust that it's already inside you, waiting for permission. This didn't start with you. It started long before you knew what friendship even meant, before you knew what words like intimacy or vulnerability were. Back then, it was just play, movement, competition, someone to run with, someone to build with, someone to throw something at. If you were a boy and you wanted to belong, you learned early on that doing was safer than feeling. And if you ever did try to talk about what was happening inside you, if you cried or struggled or asked for help, you probably learned just as quickly that silence got you more acceptance than softness ever did. It didn't take a dramatic trauma to shape you. It just took repetition. Enough moments where the reward came from holding it in, not letting it out. Enough times when the other boys laughed instead of listened, when the adults changed the subject, when the words didn't land the way you hoped they would. You learned not to bother, not because you didn't care, but because you did. Because the cost of not fitting in felt greater than the cost of shutting down. So you did what boys do. You adapted. You found connection through shared tasks, through banter, through side-by-side activities where no one had to make eye contact or admit what was really going on beneath the surface. And you bonded with other boys doing the same thing, each one silently agreeing not to open certain doors, not to ask too much, not to go too far. That's how male friendships got built. Quietly, cautiously, functionally, like scaffolding, enough to hold something up, but never quite built to hold something in. The structure was never the problem. It made sense in its time. It gave boys a way to stay close without feeling exposed. But over time, the same structure that protected you started to restrict you. Because the older you get, the more life asks of you. Grief arrives, love gets complicated, responsibility deepens, questions get heavier, and suddenly the scaffolding starts to creak. What once felt like safety starts to feel like isolation. You show up to the same pub, the same mates, the same rhythms, and walk away still carrying everything you brought in with you. Nothing changed. No one asked. You didn't either. And the sad thing is, most men aren't emotionally unavailable. They're just emotionally underfed and too proud to admit they're starving. It's not because you don't want to talk, it's because no one ever taught you how. The invisible training didn't just teach you how to speak, it taught you what not to say. This isn't a dig, it's an honest observation of what causes men the most pain. What to avoid, what to brush off, what to bury. And now, here you are, wondering why connection feels hard, why emotional conversations feel fake, why someone asking, "How are you really?" feels more like an ambush than an invitation. But it's not too late. You're not too far gone. You don't have to throw away everything you know to build something deeper. You just need to understand the rules you were taught, so you can choose consciously whether they still serve you. You don't notice it at first. How could you? There's always someone around. There's the group chat, the meetup, the banter, the plans for the weekend, the job that fills the hours and the noise that fills the silence. It all looks like connection. It passes for closeness. You laugh together, you eat together, you show up. But over time, something strange starts to happen. You begin to feel lonelier in those spaces than you ever did outside of them. Because somewhere along the line, being with people stopped meaning being known by them. And being known, truly known, is what we're all wired to crave. The slow burn cost is not that men are abandoned, it's that they're surrounded and still unseen. That they're relied on, but rarely asked about. That their struggles are tolerated, but not touched. So they start editing, trimming down what they share, softening the edge, rewriting the truth in ways that feel easier to say. And eventually they forget what it even felt like to speak from the center of themselves. And you'd never know it from the outside. They're still functioning, still showing up, still laughing at the jokes and buying the round, but the light behind their eyes has dimmed. Not because life took it away, but because they were never shown how to keep it lit. This is where the ache gets deeper, not in the dramatic fallouts or the loud betrayals, but in the quiet erosion of emotional vocabulary. The realization that no one's asked a follow-up question in years. That if you disappeared emotionally, if your spirit slowly drained out of you, most people would only notice when your job suffered, or your temper cracked, or your body gave out. And in relationships, this silence becomes its own weapon. Not intentional, just repeated. You show up for your partner, physically. You nod at the right times. You say you're fine. And for a while, that's enough. But one day, they'll ask you something simple. How do you feel about this? And the pause will be too long. Not because you're hiding something, but because you genuinely don't know. This is how it plays out. Men raised to never open the door start building lives where no one ever knocks. And it's not until something cracks, grief, burnout, heartbreak, that they realize how hollow the structure has become. That's the cost. Not tears or tantrums or loss, just distance. Dilution, disconnection, a life lived beside others, not with them. A heart half-tuned because no one taught it how to sing at full volume, not for drama, not for attention, just for truth. And the tragedy is not that it happened. The tragedy is that it felt normal, that it was never questioned, until now. It happened at a day festival. Music, drinks, warm weather, good energy. A woman, bold, bright, the kind who doesn't waste time on surface talk, bumped into her ex. They hadn't seen each other in a while. At first, it was small talk, quick exchanges, no tension, and then, without warning, she leaned in with something simple, human, honest. She asked him, "How are you?" Not the polite version, not the casual kind, the real kind, the one that actually wants an answer. He didn't like it. His face shifted, his body braced, he deflected. She asked again, gently, curiously. He pushed back harder. She kept trying, still in that open, slightly intense way some women have when they want to see you. And for reasons he probably couldn't name, it all started to unravel. By the end of the interaction, he was defensive, closed off, angry. She felt confused. He felt exposed. And neither of them knew how it had escalated so fast. But I do, because that man wasn't reacting to her. He was reacting to the structure that raised him, the same scaffolding we've been talking about, the one that never made space for follow-up questions, the one that confused curiosity with confrontation, the one that quietly taught him, if someone wants to know you, something bad is coming. You could hear it in the way he recoiled, like she was trying to pry open a door that had been shut and bolted for years. Not because he didn't want to be known, but because being known had never been safe. I've seen this play out in therapy rooms, relationships, even in friendships between men. The moment someone offers a little more presence, a little more attention, a little more emotional gravity, and it's met with resistance. Not because the man doesn't care, but because he doesn't have a file folder for what's happening. He's never held that level of presence before. He doesn't know where to put it. And here's the heartbreak. He'll walk away from that moment thinking he did the right thing by shutting it down. He'll tell himself she was too much, that the vibe was weird, that he was just caught off guard. But what really happened was something far more important and far more painful. For a brief moment, someone offered him the chance to be seen, and he didn't know how to say yes. And this is what we mean when we say the cost of the old structure runs deep, because this wasn't about a bad man or a dramatic fight. It was about what happens when closeness knocks on the door of someone who's been taught never to answer. This isn't rare. This is common, and that's why we're having this conversation. Because once you see it clearly, once you realize that reaction wasn't anger, but fear, you can finally start to meet yourself with a new kind of grace. There comes a point when discomfort stops being a warning sign and starts becoming a doorway. A moment when the awkwardness isn't there to stop you, it's there to show you where you've never been allowed to go. That's what it feels like the first time someone really asks. The first time someone says, "Tell me more," and means it. You want to answer, but the words catch. The instinct is to dodge, deflect, turn it into a joke. You can feel the armor creaking, even as something underneath it stirs and says, "Please don't leave." This is the moment men often mistake for something being wrong. Like the discomfort means this isn't natural. Like if it doesn't feel smooth or automatic, it must not be real. But the truth is, all growth feels unnatural at first, especially when it asks you to access muscles you were never trained to use, especially when those muscles are emotional, especially when vulnerability has only ever been framed as risk. You have to teach yourself to stay, not in the conversation. Anyone can sit still and nod. I mean, really stay. Stay present. Stay curious. Stay soft enough to feel and strong enough to hold the feeling. That takes training, not because you're defective, but because for most men, this was never modeled. I remember once hearing a man say, "I'm not emotionally avoidant, I'm just emotionally unpracticed." And that landed, because it's true. Most men are not running from connection out of malice. They're just miles behind on a path they were never shown how to walk. And the first few steps feel fake, forced, contrived. But that's not because they're wrong, it's because they're new. At first, saying, "How did that feel?" sounds like a line from a book. At first, asking someone to unpack a sentence sounds like something a therapist would say, not a friend. And yes, it is going to feel unnatural the first few times. That's okay. It's supposed to. You're not pretending. You're practicing. And eventually, something shifts. The performance becomes presence. The curiosity becomes real. You stop trying to say the right thing and start saying the true thing. You stop fearing the silence and start listening to it. And the people around you, they start to feel it. They lean in. Because presence is magnetic, and someone who's willing to go deeper makes others feel safe to do the same. That's the awakening. The moment you realize you're not too late. That depth isn't reserved for other people. That you have always been capable. You just needed someone to show you the way in. And now that you're here, maybe the most important question isn't, "What should I say?" but "What am I finally ready to hear?" You were not built to carry everything alone. That's not romanticism. It's not therapy speak. It's neuroscience. Your nervous system, right now, in this body, in this life, is wired to calm down in the presence of another person. When someone reaches for your hand during stress, the emotional centers in your brain quiet. Your effort reduces. You literally become more resilient just by not being alone. This is called social baseline theory. It means that closeness isn't a luxury, it's the baseline. It's the design. And when men are trained to survive without that baseline, to stay stoic, to stand alone, to figure it out on their own, they're not just becoming emotionally isolated, they're becoming neurologically overloaded. Every challenge costs more. Every setback drains harder, because the system was never meant to run solo. And then there's emotional suppression. Most men aren't unaware of their feelings. They're trained to ignore them. And suppressing emotions, it works short term. You get through the moment. You look composed. But over time, suppressed emotion turns into something else. Elevated cortisol, shorter fuse, shallow sleep, disconnection from your own body. You stop knowing what you feel, not because you don't feel, but because you've muted the signal for so long the volume barely registers anymore. But Aristotle saw this coming. Thousands of years before neuroscience ever caught up, he described 3 kinds of friendships. Friendships of utility, of pleasure, and of virtue. Utility is the mate you drink with. Pleasure is the one you share a hobby with. But virtue? That's different. That's the kind of friendship where 2 people are committed to each other's growth, to each other's truth, to becoming better together. And the truth is, most men never reach that 3rd kind. Not because they don't want it, but because they don't know how to name it, how to ask for it, how to stay when it feels unfamiliar. But here's where something beautiful happens, because even Nietzsche, who was rarely sentimental, once wrote, "Invisible threads are the strongest ties." And those threads, they've been there all along. They're the quiet moments where someone really listened. The silence where you didn't need to pretend. The shared look when something felt heavy and you both knew without speaking. Those moments are the beginnings of virtue. They are the blueprint for a friendship that doesn't just entertain you, but expands you. One that regulates your nervous system. One that leaves you more human after every conversation, not less. You don't need to be different. You need to be returned to something you were never allowed to fully access. This is not a fix. This is a remembering, a recalibration, a realignment with something older than any culture that told you to harden. You were wired for this. You always have been. It doesn't start with a grand confession. It starts in the pause. In the moment, you'd normally move the conversation on, but you don't. You stay. You ask the next question. You don't rush past the discomfort. You make space for it, and you let the silence stretch, just enough to show you're not afraid of what lives inside it. This is the new practice. Not fixing, not forcing, just feeling, and inviting someone else to feel alongside you. For men, this might mean replacing the reflexive, "Yeah, I'm good with something 2% more honest." Not a full monologue, just a sentence that tells the truth. "It's been a bit of a rough week, actually." That's it, no drama, no rescue mission required, just a small crack in the wall. And when someone else offers you something real, anything, even slightly deeper than usual, you don't deflect. You reflect. You don't say mad or fair play and move on. You say, "What was that like for you?" You don't need a script. You just need to stay one question longer than you're used to. That's how the new scaffolding starts to form, slowly, organically, not side by side by default, but sometimes face to face, not always through activity, but occasionally through stillness. And what you'll find if you stay is that the people around you begin to soften too. They meet you there. They match your depth. They start bringing more of themselves because they feel there's room for it. And if you're a woman hearing this, someone who loves a man who never quite opens, you don't need to push harder. You just need to understand that he might not be refusing you. He might be protecting something he's never had the words for. Curiosity can still feel like confrontation to someone who's spent a lifetime being told, "Don't go there." So instead of asking, "Why won't you tell me how you feel?" try this. "Would it feel safe if I just sat with you while you think about it?" No pressure, no fixing, just shared presence. That's what he's never been taught to receive. And that's what starts to change everything. Because here's the truth most people miss. Connection is not about finding the right words, it's about being willing to stay when the right words don't come easily. It's about holding space, even when the air feels heavy. It's about recognizing that emotional fluency isn't fast, it's earned. You don't have to become a different person to experience deeper connection. You just have to stop abandoning yourself when depth arrives. Because if you can stay just a little longer, just a little softer, you'll find the version of yourself that was always waiting underneath the armor. And here's worth knowing, you won't wake up tomorrow a different person. That's not how healing works. But you might wake up a little less defended, a little more aware, a little more willing to pause, to soften, to ask that second question instead of retreating to silence. This is how it begins. Not with a breakdown, not with a spiritual awakening, but with one quiet decision. I want something deeper than this. That want alone, that seed, is enough to start rebuilding from the inside out. You'll still bump into mates and say, "All right," and they'll still say, "Yeah, good." You'll still have days when a follow-up question feels unnatural, when presence feels awkward, when closeness feels like a risk. But now you'll know what that feeling is, and that knowledge is power. You'll notice when you're armoring up. You'll see the fork in the road, retreat or remain. And more, you'll choose to remain. Because this is the becoming, not some polished performance of emotionally available man, but the slow, unpolished return to the parts of yourself that were never invited to the table. You don't need to become a guru. You don't need to speak in therapeutic sound bites. You just need to mean it when you say, "I'm here." And stay long enough to prove it. There's nothing soft about this kind of strength. It doesn't come from knowing all the answers. It comes from being willing to stay with the questions. The ones no one ever asked you. The ones you've only recently begun to ask yourself. And if you're wondering how I know all this, it's not because I watched a podcast or scraped a Reddit thread or trained an AI on Jordan Peterson's sound bites to deliver it to you in a gravelly male voice. It's because I'm not a voice actor. I'm a therapist. A real one. I've spent 20 years in the room with people like you. Men who felt hollow but didn't know why. Men who were tired of surviving and wanted to start living again. Men who had everything in place, but nothing to fall into. And what I've learned from every session, every silence, every truth whispered when the world had stopped listening, is this: you are not too late. You are not too far gone. And you are not the only one who wants more. So if this spoke to something in you, don't let it end here. Go ask one more question than you usually would. Say one thing that costs a little courage. Sit with someone you love and say nothing on purpose. Start building the scaffolding that can hold you. Because you are worth the weight of being known. And connection isn't a miracle, it's a practice. My name's Gemma Bailey, and I've seen what happens when men choose to show up for themselves. I'm here, showing up for you. Now it's your turn.